Hi, I'm Dr. Miguel Cruz, and I want to thank you for tuning in today for our class on why are you forgetting things. Classes on your brain and your brain health and what can we do about improving that. So let's get started. Let's go with a little bit of anatomy here for starters with, okay? We got the frontal lobe. Symptoms of impairment of the frontal lobe right up, basically up in here. Slower muscle movement, mental sluggishness, depressions, poor impulse control, poor social behavior and judgment, poor handwriting, poor muscle coordination, poor cognitive function. We need to ask ourselves, are we just getting old? Or is there a problem developing? Because unfortunately in our society, most of us are just, well, you know, I'm getting old. Gee whiz, it's just par for the course. These are important because looking at the symptoms that you're having, looking at where the impairments are, then we can structure a therapy that's appropriate for you. For example, with the laser, if we see you're having problems in the frontal lobe, that's the area we're gonna work on. Lisa knows with the microcurrent stimulation, the electroacuoscope, depending on what sort of impairments people are having, what is it that she needs to program in order to get the best results. Temporal lobes, either side here. Symptoms of impairment, poor memory, difficulty hearing with background noise, tinnitus, ringing in the ears. That's a common problem a lot of people have. Abnormal fatigues and insomnia. So if you're forgetting why you walk into a room, where you left your keys or parked your car at the mall, you know, we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we consider this a concern? Are we going to wait for we got full-blown Alzheimer's, or maybe realizing, well, this is happening to me, maybe I should be looking into this and seeing what can we do about it. Parietal lobes, kind of more in this area of the skull. Symptoms of impairment, balance, don't know where your arm or your leg is in relationship to the space around you, can't recognize objects through touch, putting your hands in your pocket. We should be able to put our hands in your pocket and, you know, we know what's in there. If you ever catch yourself doing that and you realize, what is that? And you realize it's something you should have been able to identify, there's an impairment right there. So what you got to look for, are you knocking things over and tripping over yourself a lot, more so than you've ever done in the past? Those are the sort of things that are tipping you off that, maybe there's a problem going on. The cerebellum is back here in the very back. Symptoms of impairment, vertigo, subtle shakes at your end stage movements, poor balance, holding your hands out. Do your fingers shake and tremble, or are you able to keep a nice, good, steady? That's what we look for with that one right there. Question we need to ask ourselves, if you're having some of these symptoms, how bad are we going to let it get before we actually decide to do something about it? Occipital, up here. Symptoms of impairment, difficulty recognizing shapes, color, motion, hallucinations, floaters in your eyes. I hear that a lot from people. Recurrence of a visual image which has been moved away. You kind of see halos of objects that you were looking at, okay? So looking at some fundamentals of brain health. The nervous system has got to have a steady supply of oxygen, sugar, and it has to have stimulation. A steady supply of sugar is a key thing. It doesn't like too much sugar. It doesn't like too low of sugar. It likes a good, steady supply in there. So looking at that blood sugar level is critical. People have anemias. They're not getting enough oxygen through the blood going in. That creates problems with the poor brain healing. So these are all so critical and important. And stimulation is key as well. Sitting in front of a TV set is not stimulating the brain. Okay? It's actually letting the brain go numb. So we need to look at those things. We need to be looking at where our stimulation is. We encourage people who are coming in with brain issues to do word puzzles, crossword puzzles, games. There's all kinds of brain stimulating games on your computer. There's a website called Lumosity, which I highly recommend. I do it myself, and I really enjoy that quite a bit, okay? Liver health and function, inflammation, hormones, lack of neurotransmitter activities promoting brain deterioration. All these things basically need to be addressed when we're talking about the brain. All of those need to be addressed. So it's not a simple process. It's not just a matter of a couple little things checking or just taking a pill. We need to look at everything. We need to look at the foundations of a person's health. These are neurons. This little space between them is what's called a synaptic cleft, and there's little chemicals called neurotransmitters that go back and forth, and so it's not just a continuous wave of messages of electrical energy going through these nerves. You've got these synapses going on throughout the whole body, and all this is happening just, how fast is that? You should know these things.
1 million a second?
Yeah, fast, pretty fast. She's still in school, so she should know these things.
I could recognize it, you're drawing.
Very good, all right. On there. So what happens when we have something like Alzheimer's, there is damage happening in the brain. And it's been thought that a lot of this damage is very much irreversible, especially if it's in advance. But there's this thing called plasticity. It's kind of like taking a detour. So here's your brain, and let's say you've got this damaged area in here. And the nerves coming from your spine, let's say people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, for example, they lose control. They can't drink a glass of water anymore. I was talking to somebody the other day, and he says, well, yeah, if I try to drink a glass of water, I throw it over my shoulder every time, okay? So what happened was the nerve is trying to get to, let's say this is the part of the brain that controls that. Well, in between there's that damage area, so they lose control. Brain plasticity is the brain's ability to say, let's find another way to get there. That's where we can heal people. You're not necessarily making that go away, but the brain is capable of rerouting those neurons, which is something that has not been really discovered, but maybe in the last 10 to 15 years to any great extent. I know when I was in school, they told us, you got brain damage, that's it. There's no hope, that's as good as it's going to get. But brain plasticity has just been found that we can reroute this. I was just reading an interesting book that went into this pretty extensively, and there's a lot of research being done in different areas where they're taking people with Parkinson's who cannot pick up a glass of water, and they're just showing them do it different. Doing something like reaching over this way to grab the glass of water, and they can do it now. Because all they did is use a different part of the brain, because they're not doing it the same way they've always done it. They're just doing it different. And it's awkward, but it's not as awkward as going like that. So they're able to bypass it this way. Does that make sense? Everybody following along with that? There's a nice picture. On the left is a normal brain. On the right is a brain that's been suffering deterioration, Alzheimer's disease, right there. So it just slowly starts wasting away. Blood sugar is one of the key factors. If somebody's coming to me with brain issues, I love to do blood work, and I want to see what their A1C is, which is the gold standard of looking at their blood sugar. But the problem with the A1C, it's only an average. So if you've got high blood sugar half the day and low blood sugar half the day, your A1C might still be within a normal range, because your body's not getting a steady flow. It's going up, down, up, down, up, down. So it becomes a problem. And with proper blood work, looking at a few other factors, it's the only way you're going to catch that. This is an important slide right here. People with swings in blood sugar are often labeled as bipolar. They put them on psychotropic drugs. Think about it. In the morning, your blood sugar's low. So you're like this, and you're just grouchy and grumpy and what have you. After you have your double frappuccino with this chocolate sprinkles on top and extra whipped cream, you're like, hey, I'm good to go. Let's go. Come on. They think you're schizophrenic or something. So you get the label. It's just blood sugar issues. Something to think about there. Okay. High carb diet not only affects swings in blood sugar, but it promotes inflammation. And that's part of what causes brain degeneration, is the inflammation. We need to start looking at getting a diet that's good with combinations of proteins and healthy fats. That prevents these swings in these blood sugars. People who've got blood sugar issues, generally speaking, way too many carbs in their diet, way too many carbs. Unfortunately, in our society, fat has been a bad word. And we need fats. It helps to stabilize blood sugar. What we need is healthy fats, not the trans fats. That's a big word these days. And it's starting to happen. People are becoming aware of the trans fats and the bad fats, but most of your cooking oils that you're getting off the shelf are not healthy. We use olive oil and coconut oil in our home. Those are the two biggest. Palm oil as well, some there. Okay, so you can screen with some of this with just a simple CBC. It's a complete blood count with your blood. It's not an expensive test. Some things I got noted on here. If you got poor circulation in your hands and feet, probably means you got poor circulation going up into your brain as well. So that's going to affect you. Low blood pressure also means you're going to get poor circulation going up into your brain as well. And high blood pressure is not so good either. That triggers about any kind of health-related issue that there is, particularly with the brain. I know I was having some problems myself, and I was carefully logging everything. My issue was my blood sugar was going high. And I was looking at all my foods, and I was looking at just every aspect, and I found two things shot my blood sugar up. Bread and stress. I could eat perfect, I could have eat perfect, and I had a stressful event happen during the day. The next morning, my blood sugar's high. If all other things being equal, if I have no stress, then the next morning my blood sugar generally is going to be fine. And I found this out by just carefully logging everything on a regular basis. So stress and bread were two things that were shooting my blood sugar up. And once I got those under control, I can tell the big difference. My wife definitely can tell the big difference in how my brain was functioning. Gluten. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but there's a lot of talk on gluten these days. There's some people that are saying it's all, that's a bunch of hogwash, it's being overdone, and I do believe it is being overdone to some extent. It's become a fad, you might say. Gluten-free's become somewhat of a fad, and some people are making a lot of money on it, but gluten is a problem. And I can tell you wholeheartedly from just testing patients, gluten is a problem. So we can get people on gluten-free diets, and they can see huge improvements in how their body reacts and different symptoms that they're having. And it's because gluten is feeding an inflammatory process in their body. The good news is there's testing for that. So it can be tested. You can rule it in, you can rule it out. So one way to know is by paying attention to how you feel after meals. Symptoms of gluten sensitivity is that eating any kind of grains, you feel tired right afterwards. You feel bloated after meals. Those are your typical symptoms. This talks about what's called a leaky gut. Basically is what happens when you have a gluten sensitivity. And it just, the lining of the intestines become damaged every time you have gluten. Your body just reacts to it, and it's not a healthy thing for you. And it allows parts of food particles to get through that shouldn't be getting through, and to put it in as simple of terms as possible. And next thing you know, you've got food allergies, which is the next step. Once you get a gluten problem, the lining of your gut becomes damaged. Certain foods will react, certain foods get through, and then your body starts producing antibodies to those foods, and now all of a sudden you get a reaction every time you eat some of these foods, and you wonder why, because well, I've been eating this stuff all my life. How come all of a sudden I'm allergic to it? That's one of the reasons. There's what's called the gut-brain axis. Symptoms include what we've pretty much talked about. Difficulty digesting your foods, irregular bowel movements, bloating or gas after your meals, intolerance to certain foods, frequent abdominal discomfort after meals. There's what's called the vagus nerve. Comes out from the brain stem. The vagus nerve has been shown to be affected by the top vertebrae in your spine called the atlas vertebrae. And pressure in that area will affect the vagus nerve, which will affect pretty much about anything in your body, because that vagus nerve is part of what we call the autonomic nervous system, which controls all organ functions there. One of the ways of checking that is what we call the gag reflex. And the gag reflex is dependent on the vagus nerve, which is one of our cranial nerves as well. So looking at that as being a healthy response will let us know if there's a problem up there or not. Taking antacids or other drugs that just people are doing for reflux isn't going to fix the problem. It's just going to temporarily resolve your symptoms. But if you're doing it on a daily basis, the problem's just getting worse. Over the long run, these sort of things do lead to brain degeneration. There's a lot of research with Parkinson's that has shown that constipation has been one of the symptoms of almost every Parkinson's patient years before the Parkinson's symptoms started showing up. Studies link poor gut health to Parkinson's, depression, mood disorders, schizophrenia, memory loss. So our brain symptoms include brain fog, confusion, memory lapses, and it can be, you can reverse the process, but it requires some strict diet, and there's certain supplements that will heal the gut lining, but it can all be healed, and we've gotten very good results with that. Autoimmunity is a big issue, and your body's attacking your joints all of a sudden. We need to still look at what's triggering that, because a lot of times it's people's foods, and the reason for it is it all goes down to genetics. And if we look at genetic code, just to simplify, let's say that's a genetic code for your joints in your hand, okay? Well, let's just say that gluten has a genetic code of this here. The body identifies that right there and that right there. And then here's your joints, here's gluten. It sees this similar. It says, huh, that kind of looks like gluten to me, or you're allergic to gluten, and it sees that in your joint and it says, that looks like gluten to me. Boom, let's attack it. That's where the body gets confused here. Because genetically, there's a lot of codes that do reproduce with a lot of things. I mean, there's only so many codes out there. And there's millions of them, but This is where a lot of that problem, this is a very simplified version, but that's where a lot of that comes from. And they've actually have identified, there's testing for this. It is common enough that there's been significant amount of validation done, and there's testing for different foods that seem to react with different parts of the body, and they call that cross reaction. And it can be tested. We've run the test quite a few times with our patients. The problem we have in our society, in our how it's being treated right now, most of these neurological problems, nobody is doing anything about it until it's too late. They're waiting for you to get to where you have fallen off the cliff and you're at a point of no return. Another example. Okay, up here is where we want to be. This is healthy. Here, this is a mountaintop. Most doctors, when they're looking at your blood work, the blood works have a high and a low range, okay? You're considered to have a pathological problem, you're sick, when you've fallen off the cliff. Right here. This would be a low range, this would be a high range, let's say, okay? Well, what about if you're hanging on for dear life, but you haven't fallen off the cliff yet? You see what I'm getting at right there? Okay? When you're looking at blood values, they've actually done research and found there's an actual, what we call a functional value, which is a healthy value. This is, they took a population of supposedly healthy people and gotten their blood labs here, which is a tighter range than what we got over here. So I often find that a lot of our patients, their problems are being overlooked because they're over here. They're hanging on for dear life, but because they haven't fallen off the cliff, nobody's labeled them with a disease or a process yet. They say, well, you know, when it gets bad enough, you come back. And then all of a sudden, the symptoms are twice as bad as they used to be, and they do the blood work, and they say, oh, yes, well, here's why you got your problem. Look at it right there. Well, we needed to have done something about it before you fell off the cliff. That's where our current healthcare system is lacking. So brain symptoms with relapse and remitting pattern associated with stress, poor sleep, and immune activation. Autism is an extreme example of that. Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's are all in these categories. You're not going to get the diagnosis until you've fallen off the cliff. These things usually take years to slowly but surely develop. What can you do about it? Basically, to finish up here, I mentioned about filling out some questionnaires. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more, we've got a series of questionnaires that you can fill out. Just talk to somebody at the front desk if you want to do that. And that helps us, it gives us a starting point, okay? We definitely recommend blood work. The questionnaires are nice, they give us some ideas, but without blood work, you really don't know what's going on in the body. You gotta be pretty sure about these things. And a comprehensive one is the key word. What we're finding today is, unfortunately, doctors are treating you according to what your insurance will pay. So most insurances don't want to pay for a comprehensive blood work when they can get by with let's just get, you know, a few of the basics in there and just kind of see. So people are coming in all the time with just a few little tests done when they needed a lot more to really identify the key components. Start taking your health seriously. Make appropriate lifestyle changes now before it's too late. One of our keys to our success is teaching our patients a healthy lifestyle. Our philosophy is starting from the ground upward. We look at your whole body. We look at trying to get you healthy. And by getting you healthy, all these other pieces start falling into place. We have our areas of specialty, but if you're looking at getting healthy, you need to start at the foundation.